Imagine sitting down to, a perfectly heart-healthy bowl of oatmeal for breakfast.
Right. Just totally confident you're doing the right thing for your body.
Exactly. Only to discover that it's actually spiking your blood sugar just as aggressively as a candy bar.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
Right. Or, like, imagine tripping on the edge of a rug, and the deciding factor between catching your balance or suffering a life-altering hip fracture comes down to a really specific type of muscle fiber.
A fiber that you probably stopped training like a decade ago.
Exactly. Today, we are basically dismantling almost everything you thought you knew about the biology of aging.
We really have to rethink the entire paradigm. I mean, completely. The medical community spends so much time obsessing over how to simply, add more years to the end of a lifespan.
Yeah, just dragging it out.
Right. But that approach kind of misses the point entirely. If you want to not just survive, but genuinely thrive with the energy, the resilience, the physical power to actually enjoy your life, you need a radically different set of tools.
And that is our mission today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're going to extract the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed on a really comprehensive bio-individual longevity protocol.
It's a fascinating one, too.
It really is. We have a stack of excerpts here from a pretty dense, highly scientific text called Strategic Protocols for Metabolic and Cellular Longevity. And we're going to start at the macro level, looking at how your muscles and your heart physically operate. And then we're zooming all the way down.
Right down to the microscopic level.
Yeah, looking at mitochondrial cellular defense and even the neurobiology of socializing.
The beauty of this text is how it bridges that gap, between high-level clinical research and everyday application. It takes these really abstract, complicated concepts of cellular degradation and, well, translates them into actionable, measurable steps you can actually apply to your own body.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the most visible aspect of getting older, which is losing muscle. Usually when people talk about building muscle, it's framed purely around vanity. Like wanting to look good at the beach.
Yeah, the aesthetics of it all.
Exactly. But this text completely shatters that framing. Muscle isn't about aesthetics. It's like your ultimate biological insurance policy against metabolic dysfunction.
It is absolutely the foundation of the entire protocol.
Yeah.
And to understand why, we really have to look at the mechanism of what happens as we get older.
Okay.
So aging naturally induces this state called anabolic resistance.
Anabolic resistance.
That's right. In plain English, your body just becomes incredibly stubborn and significantly less efficient at synthesizing new muscle protein from the food you eat.
Wait, so getting older means our body actively resists building muscle. How exactly does that change the way we need to eat?
Well, it changes the math completely. Because of this anabolic resistance, your body's leucine threshold shoots way up.
Leucine.
Yeah, leucine is an essential amino acid. It's found predominantly in animal-based proteins, and it acts like a physical key, turning the ignition for muscle protein synthesis.
Okay, so it starts the engine.
Exactly. When you're young, that lock is well-oiled. You really don't need much of that key to start the engine. But as you age,
The lock gets rusty.
you got it, the lock gets rusted. You need a much larger, highly concentrated dose of leucine to force that metabolic pathway open. We're talking about needing like 30 to 45 grams, sometimes even more, of high-quality protein in a single sitting just to trigger the muscle-building process.
Wait, 45 grams in a single meal? That sounds exhausting. I mean, is that even realistic for someone listening right now who isn't, trying to be a competitive bodybuilder?
It takes deliberate planning, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's kind of non-negotiable if you want to preserve your function.
Right.
For an untrained individual, the baseline target is about 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. But for someone actively resistance training, the text points to Dr. Brad Schoenfeld's research, and those numbers scale up dramatically.
How dramatically?
Well, Schoenfeld found that resistance-trained individuals need anywhere from 2.4 to 3.2 grams per kilogram.
Oh, wow. These are massive targets.
They are, but the payoff is equally massive. His data showed that individuals hitting those higher targets, up to that 3.2 grams, they actually preserved an average of 0.75 kilograms more lean mass, even while they were in a caloric deficit.
That's incredible.
It's a game-changing amount of tissue when you're talking about maintaining your resting metabolic rate and, avoiding frailty later in life.
But eating the protein is only half the equation, right?
Right, you have to provide the physical stimulus. The baseline recommendation here is structured resistance training. So like 4 to 6 working sets per muscle group every week, spread over 2 to 4 days.
And here's where the mechanism gets so cool. If you think of your muscle as a literal sugar sponge for your body,
Yes, that's a perfect analogy.
because muscle tissue is responsible for disposing of roughly 80% of the circulating glucose in your bloodstream.
80%.
Yeah. When you lift heavy weights, you're building and activating these specialized transporters, they're called GLUT4, on the surface of your muscle cells.
Wow.
When your muscles contract under a heavy load, those transporters rise to the surface and physically pull sugar directly out of your bloodstream.
And, the most vital part of that process, it bypasses your body's insulin requirement entirely.
Wow, really?
Yeah, the muscle contraction alone opens the door for the glucose. That takes just an immense amount of pressure off your pancreas.
That makes so much sense. And there's this brilliant case study in the text detailing the experience of Dr. Jamie Seaman.
Oh, yes.
She's a board-certified OBGYN, and she spent her early life actively avoiding heavyweights. She grew up influenced by that 80s and 90s cocaine chic aesthetic.
Right, where extreme fragile thinness was like the ultimate goal.
Oh, the era of hours on the elliptical and eating nothing but dry salads.
Precisely. And you'd think a doctor would avoid those pitfalls, but the result of that cardio-only approach was severe. By her mid-30s, she was diagnosed with prediabetes and hypothyroidism.
Geez, in her mid-30s.
Yeah. And it wasn't until she completely abandoned the treadmill, started lifting heavy weights, and adopted a high-protein diet that she reversed her insulin resistance. She literally had to build her metabolic sponge from scratch.
Which naturally brings up a pretty fascinating dynamic. Because if our muscle is the sponge for glucose, what happens when we wring that sponge out? Or worse, like completely flood the system?
Right. Yeah.
How do we know what fuel is helping our specific engine and what is actively harming it? Which brings us to real-time metabolic tracking.
What's fascinating here is just how deeply bio-individual human nutrition actually is.
Yeah.
We've been sold this idea for decades that there's like a standard, universal, healthy diet.
Yeah.
But the reality of our biology is far more complex.
Huh.
The protocol recommends wearing a continuous glucose monitor, a CGM, for anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks just to identify your own personal biological triggers.
Because the damage from ignoring those triggers is terrifying. When you have chronic blood sugar spikes, your pancreas is forced to pump out massive waves of excess insulin just to shove that toxic excess glucose into your cells.
And over time, that overproduction leads directly to beta cell exhaustion.
Which is what?
Well, your beta cells are the actual insulin-producing factories inside your pancreas. When you constantly demand maximum output, those factories literally burn out and shut down.
Wow.
And that is the express lane to insulin resistance and eventually type 2 diabetes.
Not to mention type 3 diabetes, which is the term researchers are increasingly using to describe cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease.
Right, which is driven by insulin resistance in the brain.
Exactly.
And this silent systemic damage happens long before your doctor ever catches it during an annual physical. Insulin resistance can build up quietly in your body for 10 to 20 years before a standard fasting blood glucose test finally registers as abnormal.
20 years. That's insane.
It is. If you want a predictive early warning sign to look out for on your standard blood work, you really need to look at your triglyceride to HDL ratio.
Okay, why that specific ratio?
Because when your body becomes resistant to insulin, your liver goes into absolute overdrive, producing triglycerides, which are fat lipids in your blood, while simultaneously clearing out the good HDL cholesterol that usually protects your heart.
Oh, I see.
So if your triglyceride number divided by your HDL number is over 1.5, the data says you are highly likely to be dealing with underlying insulin resistance right now, regardless of what the scale says.
And for women navigating midlife, there's a whole other layer of complexity, right? Because the natural decline of estrogen during perimenopause and menopause significantly alters your mitochondria.
Yes, profoundly.
Without sufficient estrogen, your cells lose their metabolic flexibility, meaning they lose the ability to easily switch back and forth between burning fats and burning carbohydrates.
Which is exactly why the CGM tracking becomes so critical.
Absolutely. And this brings me back to the craziest part of this entire section.
Yeah.
These so-called healthy foods that cause these spikes.
Oh, yeah.
So Dr. Siobhan Mitchell, a researcher mentioned in the text, put on a CGM and found out that her classic heart-healthy bowl of morning oatmeal was causing her blood sugar to spike wildly.
Completely wildly.
And Cynthia Thurlow had an identical experience with plantains. She saw a 40 to 50-point glucose spike no matter what she paired them with.
Right.
So what does this all mean for standard dietary advice? is a heart-healthy bowl of oatmeal actually working against you, depending on your biology?
The data proves that there is no such thing as a universally safe carbohydrate.
Wow.
For Dr. Mitchell, the clinical solution was to just stop eating the oatmeal entirely. She started front-loading her breakfast with high-quality protein and fats, like eggs, and that successfully flattened her daily glucose curve.
Okay.
The takeaway for anyone listening is that you just cannot rely on generic food pyramids. You have to test your own biological responses.
Okay, so we figured out how to build the muscle sponge and manage the blood sugar to create steady metabolic endurance. But true longevity, like being able to actually move through the world with vigor, requires explosive power and nervous system resilience.
Absolutely.
We have to transition from talking about steady health to the necessity of brief, extreme physical stress followed by deep recovery. Let's talk about sprinting.
Right. When the text discusses high-intensity interval training, or true HIA, it's very clear. We are not talking about a grueling 45-minute boot camp class.
Thank goodness.
Right. We are talking about 20 to 30 seconds of absolute all-out maximum effort on, say, an assault bike or an incline treadmill. You need to hit 80% to 90% of your maximum heart rate.
That is intense.
It is. And then this is the part people always skip. You take a generous minute and a half of complete total recovery.
Okay.
You only accumulate about 8 minutes of high-intensity time, maybe 1 or 2 days a week.
Which, on paper, sounds way too short to actually do anything. But the biological mechanism is wild. As we age, our muscles rely on two primary types of fibers, right? Slow twitch for endurance, like jogging, and fast twitch for explosive power.
Correct.
We naturally lose those fast twitch type 2 fibers significantly faster as we get older, and standard steady-state cardio completely ignores them.
And the consequences of losing those fibers are severe.
Yeah, the text highlights this incredibly vivid scenario with Dr. Seaman. Imagine an elderly person catching their toe on the edge of a living room rug.
Right.
The difference between a minor stumble and a catastrophic fatal hip fracture has nothing to do with their cardiovascular endurance.
Right.
It is entirely dependent on whether their nervous system can fire the fast-twitch muscle fibers required to rapidly shoot their foot out, plant it, and catch their own body weight in a fraction of a second.
Is the literal difference between a quick reflex and a tragedy. Sprinting is the absolute most effective way to preserve those type 2 fast-twitch fibers. But you cannot push your nervous system to those explosive extremes without rigorously tracking how well it recovers.
Which brings us to a metric called heart rate variability, or HRV.
Yes.
Think of your HRV like an early warning radar system for your entire body. Just like a military radar detects a storm miles away before you can see the clouds, your HRV detects cellular stress and inflammation days before you ever feel a tickle in your throat or like a heavy feeling in your muscles.
That's a great way to put it.
It measures the microscopic variation in time down to the millisecond between your heartbeats.
And that millisecond variation reflects the ongoing tug-of-war between the two branches of your autonomic nervous system. You have the sympathetic branch, which is your fight-or-flight stress response, and the parasympathetic branch, which is your rest and digest recovery mode.
I always assumed that a perfectly steady heartbeat was the goal. But if we pull back and look at the mechanism, a heartbeat that is perfectly rigid and timed like a metronome is actually a clinical sign of severe biological stress and aging.
Yes, exactly.
It means your fight-or-flight system has completely hijacked the controls.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, a rigid metronome-like heartbeat is actually a sign of biological aging, whereas cardiovascular variability equals youth. A heart that demonstrates high variability, meaning microscopic, chaotic fluctuations between beats, shows a nervous system that is youthful, plastic, and highly responsive to its environment.
So if my radar system detects a massive drop in my HRV, do I just completely stop working out and stay in bed?
Well, not necessarily stay in bed, but you absolutely cancel the sprint session or the heavy lifting. You reduce your training volume to a light walk, you massively increase your hydration, and you prioritize deep sleep.
Okay.
Ignoring that radar is how you invite chronic injury.
And there's a crucial rule if you start tracking this. Never compare your raw HRV number to someone else's. Never.
Your baseline is genetic. You only track your own weekly trends looking for a low coefficient of variation, which just means your numbers stay relatively stable from day to day.
Right.
The data from W-Eat, the fitness tracking company, is staggering here. They found that a sharp, unprompted drop in HRV predicts a physical illness 24 to 48 hours before the user even feels the first symptom.
It really is predictive medicine on your wrist. Dr. Kristen Holmes, the VP of Physical Performance at WEA, she actually shared her own data. Her baseline HRV used to sit around 60 milliseconds.
Okay.
But purely by enforcing strict sleep-wake consistency, meaning she went to bed and woke up at the exact same time every single day, anchoring her circadian rhythm, she coached her baseline HRV into the triple digits.
Wow, just from sleep consistency.
Yes. It proves that your autonomic resilience is incredibly malleable, if you respect the biological recovery process.
Okay, so we've optimized the macro systems. We built the muscle power, and we have the nervous system recovery dialed in.
But that raises a massive question. Where is the body actually getting the raw energy to perform that recovery? If we pull out the microscope, it all comes down to the biological engine, the mitochondria. Here's where it gets really interesting, because we're exploring hacked cellular delivery systems.
Let's start with your internal defense. Your mitochondria are the microscopic powerhouses inside your cells. But as they generate the energy you need to live, they also produce exhaust.
Like a car engine.
Exactly, in the form of highly reactive free radicals. Normally, antioxidants sweep in and neutralize this exhaust. The problem is, as we age, standard antioxidants like a traditional CoQ10 supplement you'd buy at the grocery store cannot physically penetrate the highly selective double membrane of the mitochondria.
I have to pause you there, because the supplement industry pushes standard CoQ10 relentlessly.
Oh, constantly.
Why can't we just take normal CoQ10 or normal glutathione? Why do we need these specific microscopic magnets and peptide systems?
Well, it comes down to the uncompromising laws of cellular physics. The inside of your mitochondria maintains a highly negative electrical charge. So a standard CoQ10 molecule just bounces off the outer wall.
Oh, I see.
So molecular scientists took a CoQ10 antioxidant core and chemically bonded it to a positively charged TPP molecular tag.
Okay.
They created a patented molecule called MitoQ. Because opposites attract, that positive TPP tag acts as a microscopic magnet, pulling the antioxidant directly through the barrier and inside the mitochondrial powerhouse at concentrations up to 1,000 times higher than normal supplements.
That is literally science fiction level engineering.
That's amazing.
And the protocol suggests taking 20 milligrams of this mitoQ daily on an empty stomach, and the clinical results actually back it up. There was a landmark trial led by Dr. Doug Seals, known as the Rossman trial, working with older adults.
Right.
After just 6 weeks of targeted mitoQ, they saw a 42% improvement in endothelial function.
And we should clarify for everyone, your endothelium is the incredibly thin inner lining of your blood vessels that dictates how well your blood flows and regulates blood pressure.
Exactly. Their arterial stiffness went down so dramatically that Dr. Seals concluded it was equivalent to reversing their vascular aging by 15 to 20 years.
Unbelievable.
Right. Furthermore, it prompts senescent zombie cells to undergo programmed cell death.
Ah, yes. Zombie cells.
Yeah, these are damaged cells that refuse to die. They just linger in your tissue and constantly secrete inflammatory toxins. Clearing them out is essential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cynthia Thurlow, who spent 16 years working as a cardiology nurse practitioner, was classically trained to believe that arterial stiffening was just an inevitable, irreversible consequence of getting older.
Right, just part of aging.
Exactly.
Mm.
But seeing this mitochondrial data completely altered her clinical protocol. Protecting the microvasculature at the cellular level changes everything about how we experience midlife energy.
And that internal defense beautifully mirrors the external defense required for our skin. Because skin aging isn't just about surface wrinkles, it's heavily driven by deep oxidative stress, actively degrading the underlying collagen matrix. So taking standard collagen without stopping oxidative stress is like trying to fill a leaking bucket with water.
It's an exercise in total futility. Dave Asprey, who famously built a $20 million collagen company, came to this exact realization. You can ingest all the premium collagen you want, but if you do not plug the oxidative leak destroying the matrix, it's completely pointless.
Which brings us to the targeted solution. The protocol calls for 300 to 500 milligrams of stabilized topical glutathione. Glutathione is the body's master antioxidant, but much like CoQ10, it's incredibly fragile. If you just rub normal glutathione on your skin, the enzymes break it down before it penetrates even the first layer.
Right. To actually plug the leak, you have to use a specific formulation equipped with a ROGSH peptide delivery system.
A ROGSH peptide.
Yeah, ROGSH is essentially a microscopic protective carrier. It wraps the fragile glutathione molecule, shielding it from breakdown, and carries it deep into the dermal layers where the collagen matrix actually lives.
Wow.
And clinical trials tracking this targeted delivery showed visible reductions in wrinkles and fine lines in just 7 days.
It's unbelievable what we can do at the cellular level now, but as we reach the final piece of the protocol, we have to pivot.
We do.
Because you can meticulously optimize your muscle fibers, dial in your HRV radar, perfectly defend your cellular membranes, and every single piece of that biological armor can be completely undermined by a hidden, invisible threat in our environment.
Social isolation.
Exactly.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally view medicine and health in the modern world. We have to start treating social connection as a literal, active clinical intervention. It's not just a wellness buzzword. It is a biological necessity.
The protocol states we need to actively trade passive virtual interactions for face-to-face contact. And if you cannot be in person, you must level up the interaction. Trade a text message for a voice call. Trade a voice call for a video chat.
Right?
The mechanism here is that face-to-face interaction releases profound social reward neurotransmitters in the brain, like dopamine and oxytocin, which soothe the nervous system. But when we look at the flip side, okay, wait, you're telling me that feeling lonely actually creates a physical buildup of inflammation in my body that can dictate whether I survive a stroke?
Yes. That is exactly the terrifying reality the clinical data exposes.
My gosh.
Chronic social isolation acts as an ancient biological threat signal. Evolutionarily, if you were separated from the herd, you were in physical danger.
Right, you'd get eaten.
Exactly.
Oh.
So loneliness tells your brain to prompt your immune system into a hyper-reactive defensive state. That constant alarm bell creates a steady buildup of chronic systemic inflammation, which actively damages brain structures and accelerates the calcification of your arteries.
If you're listening right now and thinking, you operate just fine on your own, the epidemiological data begs to differ.
It really does.
Chronic isolation causes a 32% to 50% higher risk of all-cause mortality. It is biologically as dangerous to your cells as smoking cigarettes daily.
The most compelling evidence comes from Stanford neurobiologist Dr. Ben Rain. He ran clinical models on stroke recovery using mice.
Okay.
The subjects that were forced to live in isolation suffered significantly larger strokes and vastly higher mortality rates than the socially housed subjects, even though both groups had the exact same induced neurological injury.
Because the isolated subjects had massive uninhibited post-stroke inflammatory markers just surging through their bodies.
Exactly. But the patients who returned to a home full of loved ones actually had that inflammatory SOS cascade actively dampened by the presence of community.
That is wild.
The physical presence of your friends and family biochemically suppresses the inflammation that destroys your cells.
So bringing this all together for you listening, this deep dive has handed us a holistic mechanical protocol for not just living longer, but living better.
Yes.
You start by lifting heavy and eating high protein to build a muscular sugar sponge.
Right.
You use a continuous glucose monitor to discover your personal dietary triggers.
Yep.
You sprint to preserve your fast-twitch fibers for explosive power. You monitor the early warning radar of your HRV to protect your nervous system from burnout. You defend your microscopic cells with targeted molecular magnets like MitoQ.
And crucially, you step away from the screen and call a friend.
Exactly.
And as you begin to implement these tools, I want to leave you with the final thought to mull over.
Okay.
If social isolation acts as a severe biological threat signal that causes chronic, cell-destroying inflammation, how much of our modern remote work, heavily screen-based lifestyle is secretly counteracting all the expensive supplements and intense gym sessions we just discussed? Is our digital convenience actually a biological hazard?